A priest friend said to me that he had given a homily one Sunday, and he started the homily by standing in front of everybody, and he said, if you think that you are lovable and would like to be loved, raise your hand. And almost every hand went up. And then he said, another question. If you think you are capable of loving another and would like to be known as a loving person, raise your hand. And almost every hand went up. And then this priest said, okay, almost all of you say you want to be loved and you're lovable, and almost all of you say you'd like to be a loving person. Then what's stopping us? Let's go out and become loving to the whole world. And with that, the priest sat down. End of homily. You were wondering, weren't you? I put that homily in the category of a pep rally. It's sort of like, we're ready for this. Go out and do it. Make a difference. But even as the priest was telling it to me, and I don't know if it was effective or not, but as he was telling it to me, I kept thinking to myself, love. How could you be against love? But it's not that easy. It's not that easy. In fact, I find myself often suspicious when somebody comes up with a simple solution to a complex issue. And sometimes you see this in movies or in books, when somebody says, I have the one secret to happiness or the one secret to life. Really? Is it that simple? Not really. And yet, today in this gospel, Jesus makes it sound very simple. We have this dialogue going on with the scribe. Now, a scribe in modern day parlance would probably be considered a scripture scholar. He had dedicated his entire life to studying the Old Testament, primarily the Pentateuch. And so he knew it well. And it was not uncommon that when scribes would get together with a rabbi, a teacher, and he considered Jesus a teacher, they would ask questions. Because in the book of Deuteronomy, it's not just the 10 Commandments, but there's a whole list, dozens of commandments. So it was a common question, say, teacher, which one is the most important? So this scribe was not trying to test Jesus or to catch him off guard. He was simply dialoguing with a teacher. And Jesus answered and said, there is only one commandment that really matters. Love God. Love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. So he asked if there's one commandment, and he answers with kind of like a three-part answer. Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. It sounds so simple, but love is not that easy. And so even Jesus, quoting from the Old Testament, tried to spell it out, that there are more parts of it, and you have to look at all the parts. And by the way, if you listen to the first reading today from the chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, it says love God with your heart, soul, mind, strength. But it doesn't say love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus added that as an extension because you can't love God without loving your neighbor, and I don't think you can love your neighbor without loving God because God is love. Real love always is about God. But let's tear that apart. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The heart. Anybody who has studied biology knows that the human heart is pretty important. It's the core of who we are. So for centuries, for millennia, people have talked about the heart as being the center of who you are. But the heart does not look like the Valentine heart. Have you ever noticed the emojis? Everybody's using it, the heart, or that we use it as a replacement even for the word love. I heart my parish. I heart St. John the 23rd. I heart Ohio State football. Oh, I shouldn't say that. But we do things like that. We talk about love, and sometimes in pretty light and even frivolous ways. When Jesus says, love with all your heart, yes, there's the emotional level, that's fine, but it's also saying, go into the core of who you are. Is your core connected with God, with others? And then he adds to it, love with all your soul. And the soul is considered the life force. So it means engaging your life. You engage your life with the one you love. Love with all your mind. The mind is not just to analyze things and tear it apart, which, by the way, is not all that bad. We need to dissect thoughts. We have to figure out what's really going on. We have to think things through. But the mind is also about coming to understanding. And understanding connects and builds bridges. I don't know how many times I've stood right here, well, actually, usually about right here, when I have a wedding and the couple getting married are sitting right here. And I talk to them in a homily the day they're getting married, and I talk about the two becoming one. Very frequently, that's the scripture that they choose. And I say the two become one requires understanding. By the way, understanding is not the same as agreeing. You can disagree, but you still work to understand. And to understand means you go into the heart and the mind of the other person, trying to figure out what's going on. So we love with all our mind means we try to understand God's work in our lives. We're never going to succeed in understanding it completely, just like we don't understand other people completely, but we continue to work at it. Then finally, loving with all our strength. And perhaps that's the one that gets lost most. And when I say strength, I'm not talking about lifting weights or competing with somebody else. You know, I'm stronger than you are and how many push-ups you can do. We're talking about strength of character. We're talking about conviction. We're talking about commitment. We're saying that love requires an act of the will and not just something that's about emotions or feeling good. Love can be very hard, but we choose to love. In fact, sometimes we choose, especially when it's really hard. Probably I learned the best lesson that love is of strength from a woman in Cincinnati. A woman, by the way, that I never met. She's been gone now 15 to 20 years. But we used to correspond. And the reason we corresponded was because her son was on death row when I was in Mansfield, and death row was in Mansfield. And I would see her son every single week when I would visit the prison. Talk about loving with all your strength. He was convicted. He admitted his crime. There was no question about it. But she loved him anyway, and maybe even loved him more because of it. And when she would contact me by correspondence, and she would have handwritten notes, she was rather impoverished. She was physically unable to even visit him. And maybe that's why she wrote the letters so often. But she would try to say, reach out to him and let him know I care about him, I love him, and that I've got my little prayer group together and we're supporting him in every way possible. That's love that requires strength. And if we want to love God with all our strength, we also have to learn to love neighbor with all our strength and love ourselves in spite of our own flaws with all our strength. Love can be hard. So we had that priest that I talked about. He says, if you want to be loved and if you want to be able to love others, let's make it happen. And let's make it happen even when it's hard. And it's at this point I'm going to sit down.